Hello. So, for this week's podcast, Ravi and I have decided to look at the topic of clinical studies in aesthetic marketing. And I guess as a journalist, what that means to me is when you're buying into a product, whether it's a face cream off the shelf in a chemist or whether you're turning up and you're having a procedure, I guess it's looking at the studies behind those. And I think, what does that mean to us?
What we want to try to get across to people is to try to understand what clinically proven means, how much value they can put towards it, and maybe, recognize when things have been tested properly and when things maybe it's a bit more marketing than actually reliable evidence,
Yeah.
So
And I think really is what does the average consumer, i.e. me, think when they hear the phrase clinically proven, what is it that we immediately think? What does it mean? And I think the first thing when you hear it, certainly when I hear it, is it's a shortcut in my brain. Even if I don't really know what the study was, for me, it signals that it's something that's probably is safe, reliable and trustworthy. There's some authority that comes with it. And I think that it does give products that there's an authority bias that comes with it. People trust claims that are backed by science, which is why, marketing is very clever. It will always say that it's backed by science or medical authority. Clinically proven really seems to to mean something, doesn't it? And I think it also adds a sense that whatever it is that you're looking into or buying into has been independently checked. So there's a kind of safety sort that comes with that. Now, I think having said all that, what does it mean? Is there a single global standard? When you say, when someone says they've done a clinical trial, what does that actually mean? I mean, for me, the consumer, it's all the things I've just said, but actually what we're here to talk about today is, what does that mean?
Well, it can mean a lot of things, Amber. I mean, ranging from cosmetics, which won't necessarily go through the same rigorous scientific testing and investigation as a drug will.
Yeah.
I mean, so, that's the first thing. And then there's the cosmeceutical gray area where these skincare brands want to have the effect of as close as possible to a drug, but they don't want it to be registered as a drug because then they have to go through further investigations. And to get a drug licensed, well, it has to go through millions and millions of dollars worth of clinical investigation. And let me tell you
And
what
I didn't
happens
realize
there.
this.
Yeah. So first of all, you've got to design the perfect study. First of all, you've got to get ethical approval for a study. You've got to decide, what are you trying to prove here? What will this study add to medical knowledge? Okay. Then you've got to get ethical approval from an independent ethical committee, and they have to prove that this is a justified study. There's a value to this study. So that's totally separate. Once you've got approval, then there are several types of studies. There's a study where the investigator and the subject, so the patient, know what they're having done. Okay. So let us say, for example, a laser treatment. Everyone knows in the room that there's this laser doing the treatment, and the patient knows they're having a laser treatment by this laser. So there's a lot of bias. Okay. So the doctor knows that he's going to deliver this treatment, and the patient knows they're going to accept it. And sometimes patients want to help the doctors. They tend to be positive. They can be kind people. They want to show that they're helping something. They don't want to be shown that they're part of something that's been shown to be ridiculous,
Yeah.
untrue. So there's a natural bias there. So that's the least credible study, but it's still a study. And someone has
Yeah.
taken the time to try to prove that their product works or has an effect, has an effect, which they've said that they were hoping to achieve. Then you've got another study where, for example, the doctors know what a drug may be. Let us say a different type of Botox, for example. They may know that what they're injecting, but the patients don't know. So that removes the patient bias. So some patients are given placebo, which is essentially saline, and some patients are given a drug. And then they're asked to evaluate their responses, and they check their responses over a period of time. And so you get a really good idea from a patient's perspective what rather than them wanting to help the study, they don't know what they've had, but the doctors do. So then when they're trying to interpret some of the before and after pictures, they could sway one way or another which drug, which before and after picture maybe is better or than others, or which one has an effect. And then finally, you've got the randomized controlled trial, which is double blinded. Now, what does that mean? You've got patients that have been randomly selected into two groups,
Yeah.
and the doctor nor the patient know what drug, whether they're having a placebo or whether they're having a drug. So it's all, no one knows. The codes of these they're given white label drugs, and the codes are released at the end of the study once it's been proven. So that's the best quality study because there's no bias at all. Now that's the most expensive study, but that is what most drugs have to go through.
Yeah.
Now,
So actually, that's quite reassuring because the cosmetics industry, a clinical trial could mean anything from 100 people to 1,000 people. And I think we all assume that the bigger the company, possibly the better the trial, the more money they've put behind it. But we all know that, you can skew figures. A percentage is a percentage, whether it's of 10 or 1,000. But actually, even I know that, and I'm not very good at maths. In the industry that you're involved in, actually, it is much more rigorous. So I think that is the really positive takeaway from this. I mean, yes, we hear
yeah,
the word clinical trial and we get excited, but actually it does stand for something when you're coming for a procedure. So it is something that we can feel happy about.
I think you're more like, I think that, as I said, the drugs which are used, such as Botox, for example, or prescription medicines, they would have undergone the best clinical studies, the
Yeah.
best, most credible, the most reliable data. Then, an expert can still pick holes in those studies. Okay. And then and then everyone talks about FDA approval. So that's the American gold standard where everything has to be tested and approved by the FDA. And in Europe, we've previously had CE mark, which has been not as rigorous in the past, but now there's MDR regulation, medical
Yeah.
device regulation, and that's, some say, higher standards than the FDA. And that's what we now have in Europe. So now all the products and devices that are used in medicine and aesthetic medicine and in general medicine have to go meet these higher MDR regulations. So that's really good for Europe
Yeah.
as a whole.
And I mean, do patients ever ask you this? It's interesting,
No,
actually. I've certainly never asked this level of question.
I have had some patients ask whether or not this drug or this filler has been FDA approved.
Yeah.
Okay. And in Europe, we've got hundreds of fillers that are not FDA approved because the companies don't want to market the USA. They don't want to target the USA because they don't want to spend millions and millions on marketing, on research, when they know it's a safe product. That, probably because they've white labeled it and they've got a white label product and they've just rebranded it. Now that's not allowed. You've got to have MDR approval. And so that's really good for us here.
Yeah, really good.
And when you mentioned something about percentages and who funds, so let's talk about percentages. Like you said, if you've got 20 patients and 90% of them have noticed that their wrinkles are reduced after using X cream over the
Yeah.
counter, it's a bit different to saying 90% of 2,000 patients, which is, some of the best studies start at a minimum of 300 or 400 patients, and then they
Yeah.
multiply that. So, numbers counts, who funds it counts, and then what type of study it is.
So I guess as a consumer, never assume that a clinical trial is an overarching umbrella term for the same level of trial that's gone into something or testing. That you have to kind of decipher the language a bit and not just assume that because it's been through a trial that it's going to be as safe as the next thing. You do need
Yeah.
to apply some knowledge to this.
I mean, let's look at some aesthetic treatments. There's been some radiofrequency devices in the past that have been clinically proven to reduce abdominal circumference. Okay, and that's their lead headline.
Yes.
FDA approved to reduce abdominal circumference after 6 sessions, for example. Then, when you read the study, it said they've proven it's reduced the abdominal circumference by 0.5 of a centimeter. Okay. Now, that's not, or even a centimeter. Okay.
Um,
Now, how relevant to someone's life is that? What impact is that going to make on someone's life? Nothing really. Okay.
no. And also how much you could have to spend time
Mm.
and money to get that result.
And you'll notice that most, we always advise people to have a healthy lifestyle, have a healthy diet, drink lots more water. Now, if you stuck to that alone, you probably wouldn't need that radio frequencies type device, perhaps, or that body contouring device. Perhaps that's been proven to reduce your waistline by half or to 1 centimeter. Whereas some of the other devices, some of the cryolipolysis devices have been shown to, significant changes, 2 or 3 inches. Now that's different.
Yeah.
That's been shown to be very different.
Yeah. So, yeah, I guess it's all the obvious things. Brands are always going to highlight the positive outcomes. There's going to be less emphasis on limitations or variability, 5 of a centimeter.
Yeah.
marketing isn't necessarily deceptive, but it's selective. So I think if you go into this knowing that, then you're going in with your eyes wide open.
I think a lot of people who are used to the beauty industry, the aesthetics, they start to realize that, I think the value is that in aesthetics, things have to have been tested to some point. Okay. There has to be published. So a paper, for example, when you publish the research, generally so it's called a paper that's published in a journal. And that paper has to be read and reviewed by selected peers. Okay. So these are generally people who appreciate academia, critique that paper so much, and until they're happy, that paper will not be published in a journal. So when a paper has been published in a journal, that has passed significant critical review and been deemed to be this research has been carried out relatively well.
Yeah.
Okay. So whereas sometimes there's something called a white paper, and that's generally a scientific research paper, but it's not necessarily been accepted in a journal yet. It might be before it's been
Okay.
accepted in a journal yet.
I didn't actually know that.
Yeah.
Can I lead on to my favourite thing now? The
Go
before and
on.
after photo, which I personally am obsessed with. I know everybody loves a before and after.
Yes, they do, especially editors.
Yeah.
If it if it's not blazingly obvious, they won't publish it. What do most people want? They want subtle results that no one can tell they've had work done. They want their skin to feel good, and that unfortunately doesn't show up very dramatically on a before and after picture.
Yeah. I mean, they're really powerful. A picture can say 1,000 words. It's so easy to look at them and not see the whole story behind it. You see the before, okay, and then you see the after. I guess the question, there are so many questions we should be asking, but we want to believe what we see. We want to believe that the person in question, man or woman, has had, the question isn't even how many treatments, what the downtime was, what they look like in between. You just get hooked on the image because you see the results. So I guess my warning with it, being the person who loves them the most, is that there are a lot of questions you should be asking.
Well, first, this is where a little knowledge of photography and working with light comes into it. So, for example,
Yes.
you know, look at the before photo, and in some cases, the before photo will have down lighting. It'll make the person there'll be a lot of shadows on their face. And then the after photo will be a full frontal lighting and flatten their face and all the features. And you know what? You don't need to treat that patient to show an amazing change in their appearance.
Yeah. We all know the
So
power of good lighting.
consistent lighting is key.
Okay.
Okay, absolutely key. And like you said, what is that before and after trying to promote? What's it trying to say had happened? There's a famous celebrity was published a few years back where she said she'd had the company that said they'd had this treatment and it made such a big difference. And I think it was a thread lift company. No, it wasn't. It was a radio frequency microneedling company, and she looked amazing. The before and after was amazing. The lighting was great, everything. But she'd had thread lifts, peels, Botox, and the radio frequency microneedling. So there was a whole host of treatments over a period of about 6 to 8 months that had made that difference.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's
and she probably didn't pay for it either.
yeah. So I guess the takeaway from this is that the images don't just show the result. They are there to quietly sell a promise. And it's about this
Absolutely.
idea that it's fast, permanent, and universally achievable. But what they're not telling you is, as you say, what's got into the result. So yeah, they're great and we all love them, but there's lots of questions you need to ask when you see them and maybe not just
Yes.
sold on that promise.
When you go to a clinic, for example, and you want to see, and you get shown some before and after pictures, well, the first thing you should ask is, are they those clinics' treatments? Are those clinics' patients? It's not necessarily a problem if they're not their patients, but they shouldn't pass them off as their own.
No,
If it's a brand new treatment, it's new to a clinic, they're not going to have any before and afters yet.
no.
And then many before and afters, it's hard to use because many patients won't let you use their pictures. So for any before and after that we show in our practice, we have written consent from a patient.
Am I right that sometimes you don't just have the before and after, you will show pictures of the patient going through the procedure? And I think that's
That's
when it's
almost
all
critical.
transparency. Yeah.
particularly with some of the laser resurfacing procedures.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so what other questions should we be asking? I guess going back to the idea of the whole study, should we be asking who funds these studies? Does that matter? Is that relevant?
Yes. If so, the initial trials that are published for a launch, they're always going to be funded by the pharmaceutical company, always.
Yeah.
All right. It's the subsequent trials. It now does this when you compare one to the other, or when one product is criticizing another. If you find out that that's been funded by one pharmaceuticals companies and they're criticizing a competitive product or saying theirs is better, then you can't believe that as
No.
much. But what they raise questions in aesthetics, these smaller studies and these subsequent studies, which are funded by pharmaceuticals, is that they raise questions for debate amongst the experts. So there are hundreds of conferences a year, and there are 4 or 5, major ones. And in those conferences, these studies are debated. And then you have to try to replicate the findings of these studies in practice. And if it's shown later that no one can produce the results of those studies in practice, then the original study is doubted. So here's an example, a real life example was the MMR scandal
Ah, yes,
back
yes.
in the day when my kids were about to have their first MMR jabs.
Yep.
And I was a GP at the time. The scandal was that this MMR would cause autism, Crohn's disease, and it was a big, big news. Remember, it was life changing for a lot of people. Nearly every civilized country's health department tried to replicate the study findings, and not one country managed to replicate it. And that's when it was found that the studies were found to be fraudulent, and because the main investigator had an interest in promoting single vaccines. He had a company that produced single vaccine. And I think he went to prison for a period of time as well.
Wow, I didn't actually know that. It caused absolute hysteria at the time. And I know as a parent, just chasing around trying to find the individual vaccines because I was absolutely terrified that I was going to cause, some long-term damage to my
Absolutely.
children. Yeah.
You can understand the concerns. And unfortunately, it did bring back measles, mumps, and rubella for a period of time. But yeah, but that was a classic case of where fraudulent data was discovered because no one else could reproduce that data.
Yeah. Well, we don't need scary newspaper articles anymore now, Ravi, because we have social media. How has social media changed
Well, I wonder how
people's
many
judge?
likes he would have got.
Yeah. How's that changed how people judge credibility? Because it's certainly changed mine, whether, aware of I am of how much it changes my behavior. It's a completely different question, but I mean, it definitely has.
It's likes. It's about
Yeah.
likes these days and views. So that's not science just because you're popular.
No.
Science isn't meant to be popular. Science is meant to be safety, giving people an idea of what's safe. Um, There's been recently this week, we've been asked about a treatment for face tightening. We're using a gentle laser that goes under the skin. And there must be some recent viral TikToks or something about that treatment going on. And in all fairness, when it works, it gives modest results, but it's a very inconsistent treatment. The results are very difficult to reproduce consistently.
Okay.
But it's gone viral on TikTok, and I've had about half a dozen patients ask me about it this week. What do you think about it? What do you think about it? And I just explained to them, I don't have it because the results are inconsistent. Colleagues of mine who've invested in that technology have been massively disappointed. So popular and going viral doesn't mean it's been scientifically proven. They're really good at marketing. I'll give them that. I raise my hat to that.
But
You
listen,
know,
it only takes one A-list celebrity to look absolutely amazing suddenly on a red carpet, and then someone to put a microphone in their face and say, "Oh, what have you had done?" They're probably not going to tell the truth in that moment and say, "Actually, for the last 12 months, I've been having this, this, this." They'll say, "Oh, I've been having this laser." And that's enough, isn't it? That's it. Then
if
everybody
they've been,
have that
if they've
laser.
received a healthy paycheck, then they'll
Yeah.
say that.
Yeah,
They're not
or
going to
they just
say it
don't
for
want to
free.
have to confess that they've just gone under the knife, or it could just be a throwaway remark, but it could be enough to send the whole industry into a tiz.
But I think they will not say anything without being sponsored.
Yeah, it would have to have a big paycheck.
100%, 100%. Why? And again, that's their career. Why shouldn't they take
Yeah,
advantage of that? But for example, if there was one of the the deep plane facelift suddenly went massively viral last year because
Yes.
of a known super celebrity. So, and as a result, congratulations to the plastics all around the world. They can charge anything from 60,000 to 500,000 for a deep plane facelift. Yeah.
But is it right that it wasn't even new? Everyone just jumped on it, assumed that it was this new procedure, but actually before I'd heard about it, I mean, how long
No,
had that procedure been happening?
10 years.
Yeah. See, isn't that amazing? Even I assumed that it was just the latest, greatest, but actually it was something that had been around for 10 years.
If you think about it, if it is new, how can suddenly all of these plastic surgeons all around the world suddenly be good at it?
So do you think on the back of that, that actually sometimes consumers trust products more than practitioners? It's the brand name and the product that become, everyone can tell you about a deep plane facelift now. Everyone can tell you about certain products on the market. And do we put too much trust in that and not actually the practitioner?
I mean, at the end of the day, the manufacturers are the ones paying the PR agencies and the marketing companies to promote their product. They're not promoting the doctors or the
No, and they have
clinicians.
huge budgets.
Huge budgets,
Yeah.
some more than others. I mean, for example, years back, there was Smart Lipo, for example, which was a laser liposuction, a lunchtime lipo. It was marketed as, go for lunch, lose your fat, and go back to work in the afternoon.
I mean, as a copywriter, it's so brilliant. Smart lipo, as opposed to the not smart one.
Yeah, the dumb one.
Yeah. Get the smart one, not the not smart one.
So, that was great marketing. Unfortunately, that technique didn't produce results which patients were expecting, but it did raise questions for consumers to go to doctors, and then they were given alternatives,
Yeah.
which did
Well,
work.
there was a lunchtime facelift for a while as well. I definitely remember flirting with the idea of having a facelift in my lunch hour instead of a sandwich one day.
I mean,
And then I
I
read
mean that
into
could have
that and
been
realised it wasn't true either.
that could have been HIFU, that could have been liquid fillers, that could have
Yeah.
been threads, that could have been anything. So, again, it's great marketing, but it's not clinical studies. So do they
Yeah.
trust the product more than the brand? The product opens the door to patients to come, and then they should ask the question to their clinician, what do you know about this? Is this any good? And then listen to their advice. And if they're an honest, ethical doctor, they will tell them the right advice. Yeah. So you've got to choose your practitioners. And it goes back to what we were talking about in our podcast last time was,
Yeah.
trust your gut. You've got to trust your gut feeling about these practitioners, these clinicians, and, are they just selling you something because it's new, or are they looking out for your best interests rather than their bank balance?
Yeah. So I guess it takes us full circle. What the questions that consumers ask but don't, should ask but don't. And it's always it's just this reinforcing the same message, really, isn't it? It's asking the questions that you're only going to be informed by asking the questions, and the more you ask, the clearer the picture you're going to get, and the more confident you're going to feel about your choices. And at the end of the day, it is about making the right choice with the right practitioner.
Yes. And with clinical studies, if you've read something in the press and it's proven, just ask your practitioner, what are your thoughts about that study?
Yeah, yeah,
And sometimes you might be educating them and they might look it up. And this day and age is very easy in front of a patient to look up the paper, have a quick glance at some critical factors that are, who paid for the study, how big was the study, was it randomized, what were the true findings, what was the failure rate, what was the success rate, this is something to happen. If a study says 70% of 2,000 patients were happy, most of my patients believe 100%. Okay. They mostly say, oh, well, yes, that's proven. It works. But when it doesn't, okay, I'll go, oh, well, you're in that 30%.
Mm.
But they go, hang on, no, I want to be in that 70%.
No one wants to be in that, Ravi.
Well, it's a sizable chunk,
Yeah,
30%.
yeah,
But that's a relatively common percentage in drugs and pharmaceuticals, So people need to understand the only certainty in life is that we're all going to die. Okay.
that's
Apart from
very
that,
true.
you have to appreciate that there is no 100%. And you might be one of those people that just don't, for some reason, whatever reason it is, that doesn't work for you. It's not a fault of the practitioner. It's just stats.
No, because if there was a procedure out there that was 100% successful on 100% of people, we'd all be doing it.
Exactly.
I
I mean,
so sum it up for listeners really. When they hear the word clinically proven, what's the one thing that we want people to take away that they should remember when they see that and when they read that?
who paid for the study?
Who paid for the study? Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. I would say personally that it's about curiosity over cynicism. Don't just take things at face value, but don't panic either. Ask questions, look for context, and focus on looking at building confidence over hype. Don't get sidetracked by social media. Don't get enticed by the before and after picture. Sure, they're a great reference point, but ask the questions. Clinically
Ask the
proven can mean a
questions.
lot of things. Yeah. And our goal, I guess, is understanding and not being fearful about it.
Okay, Amber. So what are we going to talk about next time?
So next week, I quite fancy looking at the buzziest treatments for 2026. All the things out there that are getting lots of editorial and lots of attention and actually explaining what they are and digging down into them.
Oh, I better do some homework and start reading.
I'm obsessed. I'll be able to, I can talk about this for an hour on my own.
Thanks for listening, everybody. We are available on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. So don't forget to subscribe to us and if you like what you hear, please press that like button. Thank
Until
you very
next
much.
time.
See you next time. Bye.
Bye.